This video is the advanced version for how to sew your muslin mock-up. This is based on the 3 other videos that we did our draft for our custom pants. The tools that you'll be needing for this video is your original pant draft, some muslin, your soft ruler, some fabric scissors, thread snips, some contrasting dark colored thread, a pencil, pins, ruler, tape, your ironing board, and of course a sewing machine. Alright, let's get our measurements. So take out your front draft and back draft and put them side by side. And we want to find out which one is the tallest, and then we're going to add 4 inches to that measurement. And then you also want to find out which one is the widest and add 4 inches to that measurement. Once you unpack your muslin, remember that the selvage is the length grain, and we're going to align our pants to be cut on the length grain. As always, clip the selvage and tear it off completely. And then here I have a cut edge from the factory, so I want to clip and tear that as well, so I know that this is one perfect straight line. And then get your full length grain plus 4 inches, clip that and tear it. Now I want to measure for the width of my pants, and as I fold it in half, I'm noticing I can actually get 2 pairs of pants out of this if I just cut it in half. The opposite side of the selvage was cut from the factory, so I need to make sure I snip this and tear an inch off, so now all 4 sides have been torn. Now I can fold it in half, double check, yes, my pants will fit. I'm going to clip this in half, tear it in half, and now I have 2 pieces to block for my front pattern piece. And then I'll do the exact same thing again for the back. Go through the usual blocking process for all 4 of your muslin pieces. Snapping out the edges and pulling off threads on all the edges. Pressing the edges that are curled up, pressing them flat, as well as any wrinkles. And then being sure to block all 4 of your pieces. And then when they're blocked, be sure to tamp them down so that you don't lose the block. And then since this is a long piece to carry and move around, I like to fold them in half, steam them so they don't slide around, and then I'll carry them folded. Let's line up your pants. So if you remember that the middle of your pants is the grain line, so we can use the middle of this piece of muslin for our grain line. So go ahead and fold it in half, mark it with a pencil, and then we're going to do a pin pull all the way through the grains. And also remember that since this is a really long piece of muslin, sometimes it helps to have like a ruler off to the side to make sure as you're pulling the pin, you're continuing to go in a perfect straight line. So you can see my eye is looking at the ruler and the edge of my fabric as I go along. I also want to come back and double check everything. So I'm going to eyeball it to see if my pin skips some threads. I want to come back and measure to the edge to see if it's the same measurement. And also you can fold it in half and double check that the 2 folded layers are right on top of each other and your fabric is also still in block. Do this for all 4 pieces now. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to draw a pencil line inside of the pin pull. I don't want you to use a super long ruler and just hit it once because your ruler might not be perfectly following the grain. So make sure you're using your small 18-inch ruler and doing smaller segments so you're always drawing inside of that pin pull and on grain. So now we want to transfer the crotch level line. So what I did is I lined up my pattern piece to see about where is the crotch level. Mark it with a pencil, and then I can do a pin pull going both directions. And again, this is with the width grain. I'm going to double check everything, mark it, check my balance, make sure they're still aligned and parallel. And if everything's good, then I'll fill it in with pencil. On this particular one, I'm noticing that the 2 lines are not on top of each other. So what I want to do is I want to double check, did I pin pull a perfect straight line? So I'm going to eyeball it, as well as I'm going to come in here and measure. And then once I notice that yes, it's correct, then at this point my muslin is probably a little bit out of block. So I'm going to go ahead and re-block it lightly and double check everything. And then once everything is squared up again, I'll fill this in with pencil, again using my clear ruler. Now they're stacking. And then of course, because I had to block it, I want to go back and steam this and press it one more time and let it cool off completely. Since I pulled and blocked on it, I want to go back and press this again. Now that I steamed and pressed it, I just want to check it one more time. So I'm checking the balance of my block, as well as that these pencil lines are stacked, and I know everything's good to go. Now that I'm getting ready to cut, normally I would put these right sides together, which would be the pencil lines. But when I do that, I can't see the pencil lines. So how am I going to line up my pattern piece? What we're going to need to do is you're going to want to stack your fabric so they're wrong sides together, so you can see the pencil lines on the outside for both the upper piece and the lower piece. So what I'm doing is on the lower piece, I'm putting a pin through right at the crotch level and the grain line. So then I can do the same thing on the upper piece. Now I'll know once I move these pieces around and that pin is pointing exactly straight up, that those corners are right on top of each other. I will also put some pencil marks on the guidelines on the wrong side of the fabric just so I can see it all the way through. And then what I want to do is I want to pin this all together right along those pencil marks so nothing will move or shift when I'm getting ready to start cutting this out. Go ahead and do this twice, so then we'll be set up to cut our front pattern piece and our back pattern piece. Okay, so we're going to start by putting a pin right on the grain and crotch line. For both the front and the back, how you want to start is put a pin at the grain line and the crotch level line, and then you can slowly pivot your pattern piece around so then you can start matching up all your grain lines and guidelines. And then I like to start pinning at the crotch level and at the grain line before I start to go and move out onto all of the corners and around the edges and stuff. And then once I come down to the ankle, again, I want to lock down the grain line first, and then I'll go out and start getting all my corners. At this stage, it's ready to be cut, and so go ahead and do the same thing to the back. Follow along with me and let's cut out the back pattern pieces first, and then I'll show you some more detail on cutting out the front pieces. Take your time to carefully cut all of your notches and do single snips for your dart legs. Be sure to cut this out very, very carefully because these are custom pants, custom measurements, and you don't want to change any of your results just because you cut something a little bit off. Now we want to transfer our marks to the muslin. So we already have the crotch line, but here we want to transfer the hip. So get it onto your back layer, as well as down at the knee level. We want to transfer this all the way through to the back layer. Up here at the darts, we want to get the dart tips. So go ahead and put some tape on your draft and poke all the way through all layers. And then on the back, you can poke back through and then circle the dart tips. And then you could take a few pins out so you could pull back the pattern piece and get your hip level line and circle your dart tips. As well as down at the knee, take some pins out and we can come in and get our knee level line underneath the pattern piece. So as you're cutting out the front, don't forget the part at the fly where there's a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the crotch curve and a 1 inch seam allowance for center front. Also, there's a notch at the top here at center front. And then back at the zipper stop, put some tape on there and poke through all layers. And then poke through from the back as well and circle it on the back. And the zip stop location is the same as your hip level, so make sure you transfer those lines. Circle your dart points. Flip it over and get your hip level on both sides and the dart tips on both sides. And now when I take my pattern piece completely off and I separate out my two muslins, I can see that I have all of the correct markings on both of them.
Circle at the crotch and grain.
Put a circle at the crotch and grain cross section.
Them right sides together.
Keep your pieces right sides together. Gently fold them up. And then what I like to do is I'll put them on top of the pattern piece that I cut them out with. And when I move these around, I'll hold on to the paper patterns. That way I don't stretch out my muslins. All right, so we have 2 darts on the front and back, so that's 8 total. That's the first thing we're going to want to sew on these pants. And just always remember, as you're handling your garments, make sure you carry them folded so you don't accidentally stretch them out. In your sewing machine, set it up with some dark contrasting thread like red or blue, and then sew on a piece of paper so you could check the upper and lower thread tensions. And then also we want to make sure that your machine is set at 7 stitches per inch. When you sew your darts, we're going to sew them to the right side out. So you're going to sew these darts accidentally backwards. So go ahead and draw on the correct side of the fabric your dart legs and get your creases for the center of the dart. And then, like I said, go ahead and sew these so they are to the outside. The reason being is you want them on the outside for when you do a fitting back to your dress form or yourself. If you want to pinch these darts a little bit tighter, if they're facing to the outside, you can always access them. For sewing your darts, have your thread extra long. Start at the dart tip always, and you're going to start sewing with no back tack, and sew all the way to the seam allowance. Pull this out. You can clip the threads at about 1 inch in the seam allowance, but leave the threads long at the dart tip. Always hold the threads for the first stitch so it doesn't backlash inside the bobbin casing, and the first 2 stitches should just be a straight line. And then you turn and start aiming for the dart leg off of the seam allowance. At the end of the seam allowance, again, no back tack. For the extra long threads that we left at the dart tip, we're going to tie those into 3 knots. Make sure that the first 2 knots are gentle, and then the third one you can tie in nice and tight. And then clip that, leaving it about 1 inch. Go ahead and do this for all 8 of your darts. Back at your tabletop, go ahead and finger press your darts, making sure you're getting down to every single little stitch. And then on your ironing board, let's go ahead and get those darts pressed all nice and clean, and be sure to let them cool off as well so they will hold their structure. After I finish pressing my darts, if you notice, I'll fold up all of the pant leg and make sure that the darts remain on top so there's no extra weight pushing back down and might flatten them out. The next thing we want to do is we want to stay stitch the waistline, and we're going to stay stitches at exactly 1/2 inch, the same as your seam. Make sure you know what is exactly 1/2 inch on the sewing machine that you're using, and start with no back tack and end with no back tack. Also, as you're sewing this, always remember that the darts now are a 3D object, so you want to treat this like it's a rounded out bowl. So notice my left hand is holding up the fabric as I'm sewing around in a curve, and this helps the darts to not get stretched out or crushed. When you're done, you can clip your threads down to about 1 inch. And then on your center fronts, we also want to stay stitch from the zipper stop all the way up to the waistline. And remember that this is 1 inch. So if you want to, you can go ahead and mark this in pencil so you'll sew it perfectly. On your sewing machine, pull the threads extra long just like we did with the dart tips. And you're going to start on the zip stop, no back tacks, sew all the way to the waist seam, no back tacks. And then for the zip stop threads, go ahead and pull the bobbin up to the top and tie these into 3 knots. Make sure the first 2 knots are very gentle, and then the third knot you can make nice and tight. Clip your threads down to about 1 inch and do this for both of your fronts. And then as you gently fold the legs back together, make sure that the darts are always on top. Take both of your backs and both of your fronts and come over to a tabletop. And what we're going to do is we're going to stack these correct sides together. So make sure one of your fronts is correct side together with one of the backs. And then of course you want to make sure that the side seams match and the inseams match. So if you have the wrong pant on the wrong side, you'll know immediately. Just double check one last time that yes, these are correct sides together, and then we're going to sew these up. Alright, so here's my pants. I already have the darts finished, and I'm aligning the notches along the side seam, and I'm folding my pants so then as I'm sewing, they're laying in my lap and not stretching out. Starting at the ankle with no back tack, let's sew this. Make sure your notches are matching as well as the raw edges. Take your time and also don't stretch as you sew. As I'm getting up here into the waist area with the darts, I want to make sure that the darts lay naturally like a rounded out bowl as I'm sewing. That way I don't crush them or accidentally stretch them out.
Back tack at the top.
Go ahead and back tack when you get to the top at the waist, and then clip your threads down to about 1 inch. Make sure that along the seam, none of your threads snagged or are gathering, and check both sides. Just do a quick little QA check on your workmanship. When you get ready to line up the inseams, you'll notice right away that the front panel piece is shorter than the back panel piece. So you'll need to adjust this just a little bit to get the edges to come over and match. When you do this adjustment, make sure you do not stretch anything. Again, always start here at the ankle with no back tack. And from the ankle to the notches, which is right about at knee level, it's just a straight line.
Being careful not to stretch. This is the curve of the inseam.
So at this point, you're going to start moving in a little bit into the bias of the fabric. So don't hold on to this crotch tip and stretch it out as you're sewing. Be really careful.
Back tack.
Also, go ahead and back tack at the top and then cut your threads down to about 1 inch. Do this for both of your pant legs. Down at the ankles, we're going to stay stitch a 1/2 inch circumference all the way around. Eventually, we're going to press our side seams and inseams open. So I want you to go ahead and just finger press them open down here at the ankle before we stay stitch it. Underneath the sewing machine, start with no back tack. And make sure you're following exactly 1/2 inch, and make sure that you sew over your seams with the seam allowances butterflied pressed open. Go ahead and clip any extra threads. And as you get back to your original starting point, pass up your starting point and then do a little back tack. And then clip your threads at about 1 inch. Now that we stay stitched at the waist and the ankles, let's go ahead and trim our threads all the way down to 1/2 inch. Get rid of any extra threads. And especially down here in the ankle area, you don't want your fit model or your client tripping on your pants. So make sure you get rid of any long threads down there. With your pants on the tabletop, let's go ahead and rotate your inseam so we can get it nice and flat. And we're going to finger press your inseam open. And then flip your pants over and let's finger press your side seam starting from the ankle. And then as we get up towards the hip curve area, you'll have to go a little bit slower and make sure you keep pulling it apart so you're finger pressing right down to each and every little thread. Go ahead and do this for both of your side seams and both of your inseams. Now that we've pressed our side seams and inseams, I want you to go to the pant leg that would be the pant leg for the right side of the body. So this would be the same pant leg that matches your patterns. And that pant leg, we're going to turn it correct side out.
The pant leg that we turned correct side out was the original right side of the body.
So now I have the right leg is correct side out. And I'm going to put this inside the left leg, which is still wrong side out. And I'm going to match up the inseams.
Inseam, inseam, right sides together.
Taking a closer look, here you can see I have my inseams on top of each other and the right sides together. You can tell because the pencil now is hidden in between the pant legs. The very first thing I want to do is I want to pin both of these inseams together right here at the 1/2 inch mark. And now I can start working on pinning the crotch. And I'm going to pin it from the inside. Follow along over to center front, and also let's pin this at the waist from the inside. And then I'll come down to the zip stop locations, and I'll put a pin through the upper layer, and then I can watch as I put the pin through the bottom layer, making sure I'm right on top of both zip stops. Make sure that the pin is straight and the edges of the fabric are even. And then you can come through and pin this so it's locked into place. And then I'll pull the original pin out and put it along center front. So now we have the two center fronts locked down together as well as the inseams. Let's move along the back of the crotch curve where there's a double notch and then all the way up to the waist. And again, pin this from the inside.
Now we're ready to sew the crotch seam from the inside all the way to the zipper stop.
Now what we're going to do is we're going to start at the center back crotch at the waist, and we're going to start sewing towards the zipper stop. So go ahead and start with a back tack. That way we can lock this down and it won't accidentally pop when you're trying these on. Go ahead and sew with your normal 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then as we start coming around the corner, be sure to turn your pants just the same as a cylinder turning above the machine.
Butterfly open, both sides.
Once you get to the inseams, make sure that they're both butterflied open as you sew over the top of them. And also what we want to do is you're going to pass up the inseam,
Back tack,
and then back tack back over the inseam. Again, this is so they don't accidentally pop when you're doing a fitting.
now we're coming up to the zip stop.
So keep following along your 1/2 inch seam allowance. This is along the front crotch curve now. And then eventually that's going to line up right up with the zip stop. And you want to make sure that your needle stops right on the zip stop and then back off from there. So we are doing a back tack. And then go ahead and pull this out of the machine and cut your threads to about 1 inch. The reason why we put the pant legs together and sewed the crotch seam last is so in the future, if you want to do an adjustment, you can make this tighter or looser at center back in the waist. As well, if your client has a flat tush and you wanted to take away some more fabric, you can do that in the back crotch curve. Once your pants are completed, go ahead and turn these to right side out and then just double check that everything looks good, and we're going to get ready to press these. Bring your pants over to an ironing board, and what we're going to do is we're going to get the center front grain and the center back grain on a fold.
You should be able to get it smooth and flat all the way up to the crotch line. The center back grain should be right on a fold. The center front grain right on the fold. And the side seam and the inseam are right on top of each other. Get your iron on hot, lots of steam. Personally, I don't like to have a sharp crease here. I like it to still have a roundness to it.
Once you've pressed one of your pant legs, put the two together so you can flip this over and then fold that away, and then go ahead and get back to your center front on a fold, center back on a fold, and then make sure your side seam and inseams are right on top of each other. And again, when I'm pressing this, I like to press it without making a crease.
Don't worry about the ankles.
For the ankles, you don't have to do anything special to them, just press them flat. Up in the waist and hip area, there's lots of curves and volume. So we're going to need to use our ham in order to press this. Take your time up here in the hips and waist area since it's all curvy. Make sure you keep your side seams pressed open. Keep all your volume that's built in. And then go ahead and turn your pants over and do the other side. And just be sure not to crush all the work that you just did. Now I want to get my pants ready to press the center front. So what I want to do is I want to get the side seams out off to the sides. So then center front is right in the middle. And I'll put my ham inside here and I'll have my center front fly on top of the ham. For menswear, the right side of the pants will stay flat. And then the left side will fold at center front and go on top of the right side. For women's wear, it'll be the opposite. So you'll want to have the left side is flat, and then the right side will fold at center front and come over on top of the left side. I'm going to press mine for women's wear. So you can see I have the blue stitching is the fold for the right side, and it's going to match right up against the blue stitching on the left side. So once I have this in place, I want to go ahead and steam this all the way down to the zip stop. Make sure your ham is underneath, and also make sure you do not try to press beyond the zip stop. Let this cool down completely, and then when you do a fitting back to yourself or your client or your dress form, you'll just simply pin this in a couple places instead of installing a zipper. And that's it for the sewing part. I have a video also where I talk about how it fit back to the dress form, some changes that I would make. A few things that you're looking for is right away, you just want to notice how does it feel in your tummy area. And then as we move along to the hips, how well is it fitting here in the hip?